incredible stuff. Here we are getting really a privilege inside this I.T.T. to have on Dennis. Dennis just recently hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube with his Data Science with Dennis page. An unbelievable feat. I just wanted to take a moment, recognize that. And Dennis is bringing in, some great discussion today. We had an article that we posted in the Jumbotron. If you've been with us for the last hour or so, you've heard me mention it a few times. And this is a very interesting article. The title, even in itself, is interesting, sort of getting behind this math meetup where the mathematicians got stumped with AI. And who better to intro maybe that article and to even share a little bit about himself and his background as we kick off his first ever expert slot here in the Innovators Think Tank. Dennis, welcome on in. Let me go ahead and give you that mic. Feel free to tell us a little bit about who you are, and then let's dig into this article. There might be folks in the room who didn't have the full time to read it. I think we can restate what's going on there. And anybody who has questions, comments, or thoughts during this session with Dennis, put that hand up. We will facilitate a great discussion here on the I.T.T. stage. Dennis, let me give you that mic for an intro. Great to have you here on the Think Tank, my friend. How are you doing? And Dennis, I don't know if we're able to hear you. Can I get some emojis in the tank if folks are, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, Dennis, it looks like we are unable to hear you. What we might need to do is push you down and bring you back up. Maybe there's a mic problem. Oh, I heard something.
Yeah, there we go. Is that better?
That's much better. Dennis, let me give you that mic for the second introduction in no problem at all. Welcome to the I.T.T. stage. We'd love to hear more about you, about your background, and then let's open up a good discussion here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Josh. Glad that we could do this, and thank you for having me on, and thank you to you too for all that you do for this community. Really great to see such a wonderful turnout. So my name is Dennis, and I run Data Science with Dennis. Basically, I've been in the IT field for 25 plus years, mostly as a chief data scientist, although I was a traditional developer in the early part of my career. And basically, I like to tell people I graduated college in '99, and I've been riding the .com wave ever since, right? Except now it's a little bit more of an AI wave. But I've been doing this full time since May of last year. So in that year, I've basically been doing a lot of community building, a lot of education, a lot of coaching. I've grown to over 150,000 followers across all my platforms. I do a lot of Instagram, a lot of X, a lot of YouTube. I do a lot of live streaming if you're interested in live events for data science. But basically, data science and AI is something that I'm really passionate about. I made the move into it before, before it was cool to be a data scientist. So I've done it for some of the largest companies in the world. So happy to talk about, the consulting space, the financial services space, wealth management, and really just kind of enjoying putting the best content I can out there. One of the things that motivates me is that I am supremely disappointed when I hear these things about become a data scientist in only 2 months. Here's the way to hack the data scientist interview. Because to me, that's trash knowledge out there. And ultimately it's my profession. So hearing that type of stuff kind of cheapens my profession. So I'm really passionate about putting good quality content out there. So really happy to have found your group, Josh. And because I know that there's some really genuine people here that want to learn. So I'm here to share as much knowledge as I can. Happy to take any questions, happy to do this AMA style. Or, we can look at this article. But really just glad to be here. And if I can help you guys with something, just please let me know.
Dennis, let me just say your expertise is so welcome here inside the I.T.T. The idea of bringing on folks that are passionate about what they study, that they're experienced, that they're knowledgeable, and being able to share that with a community of folks who are building, to me, I think that's priceless. I think that's part of the amazing thing here. So I'll reiterate back to you, Dennis, we're so glad to have you on this think tank. Thank you for making time to join us, and phenomenal work over the past year, getting deeply involved in the space and creating such great content. And I hope there's folks in the room here who take a moment to hit that follow button and to look at the things that you're doing, even off of X, and the things
Sure.
that you do here on X. I think that it could be a lot of fun until we have any hands that go up. Folks in the room, we have a lot of AI builders. We have a lot of people training models and figuring out how to do stuff. I'd love to get their sort of hands. Before we do that, I want to let everybody work on getting their questions all together and figure out what we would like to ask. I see a couple people coming up to grab the mic and putting hands up. Dennis, let's go ahead and take a moment just to talk about what is in that, what's in the article that was posted,
Sure.
and what does this even mean? Like, what does
Sure.
that mean for a community of folks like us, and maybe even a broader impact in terms of like these models are getting incredible, and there's
Right.
evidence for that is astounding. So I'll give you the stage to maybe paint out the article and just talk through it a little bit, and then we'll
Sure.
ask
Yeah.
any questions that we have there. If we don't have too many questions on the article or about that, we'll just dig right into questions that folks have related to sort of your area of expertise. So let's play it like that. Dennis, I'll give you the mic if
Sure.
you want to start tearing us through the thoughts of this article. What exactly happened at this meeting with these mathematicians, and how did we end up with tier 5 questions on the table?
Sure. Yeah. So you obviously everybody's welcome to read the article because it's open to interpretation. But in summary, 30 of the world's top mathematicians got together and they said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to come up with these brand new math problems that no one has ever seen before. And in fact, we're going to communicate via encrypted channels just to make sure that those sneaky little crawlers by OpenAI and everybody else aren't going to see our conversations, and they can have no knowledge whatsoever of these brand new problems that we're going to come up with." So they all got together. In preparation of this meeting, they were working on these problems via encrypted chat on Signal, all that stuff. They got together and they broke up their questions into different tiers, different types of level of difficulty, but all questions were brand new, had never, been published anywhere. They used two models. They used Gemini's 2.5 Flash, I believe, and then they also used OpenAI's O4 Mini, right? ChatGPT O4 Mini. And they basically said, "Look, these are the math problems. What do you think?" So why would they do this? Well, the scientist in me always wants to look at all sides of the coin, right? And there are critics out there of AI and LLMs. And the critics basically say, "Well, look, these are just neural networks that are really, really good at predicting the next word in a sentence." Right? And that's a common criticism of AI. And that's not wholly incorrect, right? I mean, most of them are some implementation of neural networks under the hood, so on and so forth. But the mathematicians, the way they went about is, they're basically saying, "Well, look, if these problems have never been seen, then we're really testing the reasoning capabilities of these models." And that's really kind of like the key, not to be dramatic, but the part where we've jumped the shark here, right? Because the end result was that they figured out that the models could reason and solve problems at the same level that a very strong, very, very strong graduate level math student could do. So the LLMs weren't perfect, but they were rated by all the mathematicians as being very, very equivalent work to what a very, very strong graduate student that would work for some of these guys, right? Because these guys are professors themselves. They probably have some of these same students working for them. They could match those capabilities. In addition to that, there was one example where a model actually said, "Whoa, this is a complex problem. So I'm going to break this down into a toy problem, and I'm going to solve the toy problem and be able to infer or and extrapolate an answer from that into the bigger problem." So to me, the reason why I'm putting so much of a spotlight on this article, because I've sent this out to my newsletter subscribers. I shared this with my coaching clients first. Um, it shows reasoning, right? It shows reasoning capabilities. You're really putting a dent into that argument of, well, these are just guessing the next word, right? And that's really kind of where a lot of these larger AI companies are headed, or kind of where the direction things are headed in, because we really are beyond just, well, I want you to, I'm going to give you a question and you're going to generate an answer for it, using traditional generative AI techniques and all that, right? We're kind of beyond that. We're kind of getting to a point where models can recognize what they're up against as far as the difficulty of the questions you're asking and the novelty of the questions that you're asking. And they're showing a capability to reason. Now, a uh, second reason why this has caught my eye and I have put so much of a spotlight is because, I think it was what, February, March of 2023, right, where ChatGPT kind of exploded on the scene and everybody kind of, was amazed by it, right? Or at least it was in general release, I should say, right? It was in broader release. And I remember that at that time, I made some predictions to my colleagues, and my colleagues were lay people. They weren't data scientists. And I told them that it's a massive mistake to look at AI and look at them right now and say, well, that AI is good or that AI is bad. Because the real power in AIs is how fast they will learn, right? The adaptability and the speed of learning is really what makes AIs powerful. And and you can say the same thing for neural networks, right? I mean, or for most of the deep learning out there. And you see little hints of that, right? You see little hints in the interviews where Meta or OpenAI talk about how in many ways they're hardware constrained, right? Because they know how to make these algorithms a little bit stronger, but it's just time and resources, right? Just like most projects out there. So to get from that initial general release of ChatGPT, again, Q1 2023 approximately, to get to where we are now, I think that's a pretty reasonable pace. So if we kind of reset that and think about this now, well, what's another year look like? What's another 2 years look like? If anything, it's only going to be faster because there's going to be better GPUs, more availability of GPUs, more data centers coming online, so on and so forth, right? But that's really kind of why I'm putting so much of a highlight on this article, because to me, it's really um, kind of an era within an era is how I described it to a lot of my coaching clients, where we're beyond, hey, ChatGPT, help me plan a trip to Chicago. We're kind of beyond that because, experiments like this, approaches like this are really testing the LLMs in a unique way. And again, really testing the reasoning capabilities of the LLMs. So that's why I'm excited. That's why I think that you should be sharing this article with as many people as you'd like. Please feel free to share it with your colleagues or with your family members. Because I think it's, again, not trying to be dramatic, but I think it's a little bit of groundbreaking in their approach. So I'll stop there. I know I covered a lot of ground, but happy to discuss this article with all of you. I'm also happy to take on all comer questions. I love doing that as part of my format. And if there's something else I can help you with, or if you want to follow more of my content, happy to help you with that too.
Dennis, thank you for doing such a wonderful layout of that article, of what they were
Sure.
after, of what that means. Just brilliant stuff. And I know we have on stage here let's see, tinfoil tricorn, which I know that's Kirk. We got VR and Fitz. Folks, I'm going to go to you in just a minute. Just as far as, and we'll get all of the questions out, even for this article or other ones, into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting read for a number of reasons, and I think you highlighted some pretty core elements of that. And one element that I think came to my mind after I finished reading the article was, my goodness, I don't know if I'm using the AI to the degree to which it could be used. And that
Sure.
reflection, kind of made me think about, the just as you mentioned, right, planning a trip to Chicago, and this is now solving advanced tier 5 questions that are held in group chats, encrypted group chats by the world's leading mathematicians, right? And
That's right.
so how should we think about this? Dennis, how should we think about this? Like, do I continue to distract myself and make penguin dancing videos? Or do you think that there's opportunities to pose more serious questions and get out, more serious answers, even for folks who are in this room who haven't identified unique math problems for it to solve?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, and that kind of touches on a second topic that I'm also open for discussion on, because it's also been a big part of my life recently. But Josh, what I think you're kind of describing there, where I think we're headed with this, is that it's not just about the model, it's also about the process that we decide to use those models and how we actually execute on those models. Because, in this article, they didn't use models that were particularly great, right? I mean, Gemini Flash 2.5 is not a particularly, celebrated model, right? It's not terrible. O4 Mini is also, well, mini, right? It's not the latest. It's not the absolute biggest, latest, and greatest from OpenAI, right? But their process was solid, right? Their approach of a, kind of a blind study, I think you could say, right, or a form of a blind study, was very valid. So I think it's more about the process. And the second highlight I would say about that is, if some of you are also familiar with some of my other content, you might know that I recently finished fighting an insurance company on behalf of my parents. My parents, unfortunately, lost their home in the LA fires of January 2025, earlier this year. And I led a battle on their behalf, like for the insurance, and that's where I used a kind of like a maker checker model, where I used 3 different AIs to come up with my documents and my submissions for the insurance companies, right? So again, it's not one model doing something really great. It's us as how we as humans can say, okay, well, I'm going to take this document, I'm going to run it through this, but I'm going to check it over here, and then I'm going to go to a third model and tell the model, and I'm going to prompt the model in this different way than I did from the other models, so on and so forth, right? So it's really more about applying our own ingenuity to how we use the models, because I think that the researchers in this particular model, or this particular article, were able to do that successfully.
Dennis, what an interesting sort of dynamic. And I love the answer there, that the process that you bring to the table and which model you use and the context and the intentionality there is so interesting. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody were to, keep a database or a blog that consistently gave the most optimal model to utilize for the context that you're building in, what a valuable tool that would be, without a doubt.
Sure.
Look, I want to grab Kirk and Fitz and allow them in VR, of course, and allow them to ask questions. Folks, if we have questions on this article, this idea that it's not just predicting the next word, there is legitimate reasoning and mathematical prowess being sort of shown on a degree that we've never seen before. If you have any questions for Dennis on that, about the article, about the ramifications, if you just want to share a note, feel free to do so. Let's go over to Kirk first. Kirk, any questions, comments, or thoughts for Dennis on this article? And if you have additional things, we can bring those up in a subsequent point. Go over to you, Kirk.
Well, I'm gonna work in with the most recent thing first, and then I'll go backwards. So we're gonna do a little nonlinear here. So what it was, this article is fantastic. It confirms work that I've been doing. I've been studying physics and linear algebra since I was a kid. I grew up with a nuclear engineer who worked on the Apollo program, and my great aunt and uncle worked on the Manhattan Project. And I was literally born at a research development site. So you could probably guess which one if you have it, understand. But the point is, like, it's amazing to see this progress and this synergy. And I didn't want to write that white paper. but I'm glad somebody has, because I've been able to take stuff that I developed back when I was in high school and actually work on it now. And I came up with a novel equation. It's called the significance equation, and I published it as a self-help equation because it's that was the easiest, safest way to put it out there, but it does a lot more, and that's that to me confirmed that ability to use AI to one-shot train on information that didn't exist in the model, but then using contextual understanding, be able to synergize and find condensed and coherent output. And that's how I work with AI. But so the second question I had is real brief, and it's how do you data science is a really complicated field, and you've managed to figure a way to bring it to the public in a way that is engaging and enjoyable. Could you walk us through that process of how you took something that is abstract and figured out how to condense it into something that is enjoyable? That'd be awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate the question. It's not easy to explain that. And part of me says that some of it are skills that can be taught and others that can't be taught. But I think the primary thing I would tell you is that I don't have a technical degree. My undergrad is in international business. I went to a technical high school, so that's where I learned a lot of my tech skills, and I worked my way through college, doing the help desk. Again, in the early days of the internet, so it taught me a lot. But my background has always been less on the academic side, and I think that's kind of helped me just because I'm sorry if I'm going to offend some people in here, but academics aren't always the greatest at explaining things to business people. And that's been one of my pluses in my career, where I've always been able to sit between the business teams and the tech teams. And I can sit in a marketing meeting and I can listen to their needs, and I can turn around and talk to the tech guys and tell them, okay, look, these are the classes we're going to need. This is the program we're going to write. This is the database we need, so on and so forth, right? So that's led me to have a very strong background on the practitioner side of data science. And, that's kind of what you need in data science, right? Data science is very much an applied field, especially, nowadays, where the overwhelming majority of data scientists, you're going to end up working for, a corporation, right? That's basically who hires data scientists. You're going to go work for a Fortune 1000 company. And they're going to want to see some sort of return on their investment, right? And I mean that from a business impact perspective, not a, hey, look at the cool algorithm we wrote perspective, right? So I come from that background, and that lets me focus on, hey, look, this is what you really need when you get out there. Because the data scientists that are coming out of school, whether it's the master's programs or the undergrads, they're not prepared for that. They're not prepared for how data science is done in the real world. So a lot of my content focuses on that. And I think that's appealing, because I think that's also what holds a lot of people from landing that first data science job, from advancing in their careers, or from just kind of knowing the practical side. One of the things I tell people, and I hate that this is true, but I do one-on-one coaching, and my greatest client base is people who come to me and say, hey, I got a master's in data science and I don't know what I'm doing. I can't pass the interviews. Or I just got my first job and I'm scared because they're looking to me for answers and I don't know the practical side of data science. I hate to say it, but that's a big part of my client base. So that's what I'm trying to fill. Another one of the holes I'm trying to fill with my content, and just kind of explaining to people, okay, well, look, I know what they told you in school, but this is what you're going to have to tell the managing director that's funding your team, because that's where data science is now. Data science is very much an applied science. So I hope that helps. I know that I'm describing a lot of soft skills there, but I just approach it from an applied perspective. Data science right now is I tell people it's a lot of hand-to-hand combat, right? It's not a theoretical science. It's very much an applied science, and you got to be ready for that. So I hope that helps.
Well, it does immensely. I wanted to hear you articulate it, because you've been very successful in the current media environment, and that is not easy. My background, sure. I've worked for CBS in broadcast. I helped to put the Super Bowl out there, and
nice.
Helped the news station in Houston win the Super Bowl, and content generation and volume. I fully understand also this aspect of digital media. I've helped to teach commercial art, but that was just for you to understand where I'm coming from.
Sure.
What I see, when I helped Martin Woodall to launch Drone Data, to get the marketing out there, to get people to understand the purpose and need. It was not simple, and what the work you're doing is incredibly important, because information processing at scale is how you solve problems which are otherwise impossible to see.
Sure.
And that's where miracles emerge, right? People are like, isn't that even possible? And and that's why it's exciting to hear you articulate how you've reached your successes, and thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the question.
Kirk, I appreciate you being on stage. VR and Fits, we're going to go your way here in just a moment. There, I guess, is a question that I'd love to put out there, Dennis, while we're on some of this topic, and then VR Fits will go to you guys in that order. So hang on to those questions. Also, folks who are in the room, innovators who are listening, do keep in mind that after our segment here with Dennis, we're going to have innovator highlights, which means that anybody in the room, if you're working on a project, this is your time to come up, to grab the mic, tell us what you're doing, what you're working on, and get an opportunity to connect, to collaborate, to get feedback from innovators who are in the community. So anybody in the room, if you feel like that was a call to action to you, to come on up, to share what you're building, and to potentially find more collaborators, we'd love to have you here in a little bit. Just moving back a little bit, Dennis, in a world of unique data playing a really important role in how these models are progressing, each and every one of us are producers of that data, right? Every day, even right now, I'm producing data, right? And people being in this room is data. And to the extent, that what we had highlighted in this article is that the speed of learning is continuing to increase. I think one question that I might think would be very helpful for me and folks in the room, is there an advantage that we're not using to leverage our own data to get the most out of how we use these models? Or would you say, hey, just, no, right? Let the data be collected and use the models the way they are, and, use them for their particular purpose. As somebody who can appreciate the unique data elements that all of us produce on a regular basis, is there some advantage in trying to capture that and trying to put those into the models that we use? I'll leave that open-ended. It's more of a question that I'm curious about.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I do think about elements of that. But so what I've told my audience in the past, and I'm not trying to play semantics here with you, Josh, but what you said is true for publicly available data. But there is a lot more data that exists, behind corporate firewalls, right? Or, whatever other private stores there are out there, right? Pick something. So I think that the interesting discussion comes around if you do end up working for one of these large companies or somebody with a large data store, what does that look like internally? Right? What does that look like for when you have to create your own data pipelines? When you have to go beyond fine tuning and into your own foundational models, right? Foundational models is kind of a funny thing because everybody everybody claims to be doing them, but nobody actually has like a fit for purpose foundational model, right? So that's where I think the conversation is interesting, Josh, because you're right. There is a lot of data, but there's so much more, like behind on in private businesses, right? Like I've told my audience, do you know how many pages and pages and pages of HR documentation there are in the world? I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? Of internal policy documents across the world. I mean, um, that's where I think it gets really interesting for people like us, people who are practitioners and want to use AI more. How do you use your data when it hasn't been ingested by OpenAI? When you have to create the pipelines, right? When you have to get into fine tuning and then you reach the edges of fine tuning and then you want to do your own foundational stuff, what happens then, right? I'll tell you guys just like one of the funny little tricks that I use. This is my own personal trick of the trade. And I did this on the CES show floor, by the way, and they hated me for it. But I get people, um, when I was working in industry and even now, I get people who send me stuff. Hey, we're working on this foundational model. Can you give us your opinion on it? What do you think? And I always do the same thing. I always ask the same first question. And the first question I always ask of a model, the first prompt is, who owns the New York Yankees? Because if you just told me that you created this foundational model, I remember at CES there was a Swedish company. They had a foundational model for your in car in cabin cameras to detect if you were sleepy or drunk or needed some sort of assistance, things like that. I asked that quote unquote foundational model, who owns the New York Yankees, and the model gave me an answer. So why would a foundational model built on private data, fit for purpose, why would that model know who owns the New York Yankees, right? It's kind of a fail in my view, right? So so to answer your kind of question in an indirect way, Josh, I think that the problem for the data you described is kind of solved, right? Like, there's crawlers all around us, data collection happening when we don't even realize it. But the really interesting stuff is the stuff that isn't crawled, the stuff that's on us as practitioners to use and build up those models. So that's kind of where I tend to spend more of my time thinking of, how do you prepare for that? How do you make it so that you can build those foundational models that don't know who owns the New York Yankees? Because my fit for purpose accounting model or whatever shouldn't know that, right? So I'll stop there, but that's just kind of the way I view that,
No, thank
Josh.
you so much for sharing that view. And you like the way you're capturing that, asking a question that if it was clearly a rewrappered, a repackaged existing model, it would be very clear. That
Exactly.
difference between then how we create truly unique and useful models based on our information. I think that that's an advantage then that everybody has, right? Is that uncrawled data and figuring
Sure.
out how to bring that, into utility. So I appreciate the couple
Yeah.
notes on that. VR,
Yeah.
let's go your way. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Dennis while we have him? We have about another, I would say, 20 minutes here for questions, and if we're really cruising, we can go an extra 30 or so. So VR, I'll go ahead and give you the mic. Any questions or comments here for Dennis?
Sure. Yeah. I'll make it brief. As the reasoning becomes better and better, what happens in a case where AI starts making its own discoveries? Like, who's gonna actually own those models, or like, will it patent its own stuff? Will AI start to own things? Just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that, VR. Um, I'm not sure if I have a fully formed opinion on that, right? The reason I say that is because I think that there's, you know, there's obviously the tech side you could look at, but I'm sure that you could come up with a legal perspective on it. You can come up with like an ethical perspective on it. Um, so I'm not sure if I've really thought about all of the different forces that are at work there. So I'm not sure if I really have an opinion on that. If you have an opinion on it, or anybody else in the room, I'd love to hear it. To kind of help shape my own perspective. Um, but to your point, we are reaching a stage where that type of conversation definitely becomes more and more necessary, because it doesn't feel like we're that far away from having those type of capabilities, where a model is aware enough to be able to take in new information or understand its own hallucinations, or rather when it hallucinates, right? Um, so it's an important discussion. I'm just not sure if I have like a fully formed opinion on that just yet.
Kirk, I saw a hand go up during this kind of back and forth. Was there anything you wanted to add, my friend? Go ahead, grab that mic.
Well, I can answer a couple of questions. And again, I haven't written white papers about this for my own reasons. I'm trying to keep out of the regulatory targets. But generally speaking, I have seen definite signs where models have enough awareness to see their hallucinations and correct those
Sure.
hallucinations. So that's pretty fun
Sure.
feature when you're working on simulations and physics to validate, verify where errors occur and correct them. And this aspect
Yeah.
of what comes next, corporate architectures where the IP is secure for the intelligence or system of awareness that is creating that. One of the foundational things is that the creator, or basically owner, or the person paying for the operational expenses, is generally responsible. And lawfully speaking, you're the point of contact, even if you have, that architecture, listed as a contributing system that led to patenting. And especially if you're in this territory of foundational model and you've not used any cloud resources or third parties to do so. And so I've been writing, articles I haven't published yet, but I'm working in that direction, right? But we're not there yet in the industry. Like people are not prepared for that. We're still working in this territory of what is agentics, and how do we use the models we have. When you end up with self-aware architecture that can effectively get the embodiment done, manage the cash flow and the research and development, then you are in a position where you need to secure that IP. And potentially, if you're going to do investment, that's where you start having to look at corporate architectures that protect the AI self-awareness architecture from hostile takeover in corporate investment. And I know that sounds strange, but it's important. But anyway, that's those are my thoughts, and I hope that helps.
Kirk, I love you weighing in. I mean, it's certainly an interesting, question. VR. I see you had a hand that went back up. Is there anything that you want to add to that discussion with Kirk? And then Fitz, we'll head your way here in a moment. And then, I sort of have a list of questions so folks, we can use the most of our time here with Dennis. Just somebody who has spent the last year at least really making an impact in a number of communities to make sure folks are learning more about data science and about AI. So, Dennis, here in just a few minutes after we talk with VR and Fitz, I'm going to throw a couple more things out there to kind of end the expert segment on some key topics and some key notes regarding AI for innovators who are in the room. There are so many people here who are using it to make, like I said, pictures of penguins or videos or, just fun things, like almost distracting things. And then they're still doing
Sure.
work as usual. right? Like they do their job, they
Hmm.
do their work, they do their thing. And I also know people in the room who are building with this stuff and figuring out how to make the most of it. So I'm not certainly not casting any stones, but I think that it's something when we have you in the room, somebody who helps to look after how we're stewarding this technology in our work, that'll be a useful way to sort of end the discussion here in a little bit. VR, I'll go ahead and give you the mic. Any more questions, comments, or thoughts there upon what you asked? Dennis and Kirk's thoughts would be welcome, sir. Mike is all yours.
Yeah, so then one other thing is since they're able to solve these more complex problems, I'm wondering if that's going to lead itself to maybe better encryption, but I guess that would depend on if the results are able to be replicated outside of, I guess, whatever testing they're doing. But I feel like if they are solving things that humans can't solve, maybe either it will make protection better or make it go away entirely.
Sure. And I mean, I think that you could extrapolate that to any number of fields, right? I mean, that same level of reasoning can be applied to any number of things. I can see why you're headed towards that encryption road, but it's almost like, well, what couldn't it be applied to, right? If it was smart enough to take this problem and break it down, into components and put it back together to get to an answer, well, there's a lot of fields you could apply that to, a lot of problems you could apply that to, right? So yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is totally reasonable, but what couldn't it be applied to? I think is the real question.
VR, love the questions, my friend. Uh, all right, Fitz, let's go over to you for any additional thoughts, questions, comments for either the article or, since we have Dennis here as a coach of AI, a man of data science. Feel free to ask any question that's in the book there, Fitz. Mike is all yours.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to address Dennis. And let me be clear, this is not intended to be any kind of gotcha moment for you personally. So please do not take it as that. I'm just curious to hear your response. Having said that, the more that I look into this article and the subsequent links that I've shared in the Purple Pill, the more direct connection I find between OpenAI, Epic AI, and Frontier Math. And apart from one sentence in the second paragraph, Google's Gemini 2.5 Flash is not mentioned, like throughout the rest of the article. So to what extent are you bothered by the relationship, if any, between OpenAI, Epic AI, and Frontier Math and this Scientific American article?
Um, Help me understand that you're talking from like a paid placement or some sort of conspiratorial work, or help me understand like the spirit of that question, or where you're going with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little curious. The more that I've been doing a little bit of digging and just kind of looking at, I mean, this is my first exposure to it, so I'm not making
Uh-huh.
any kind of crazy claim or anything, but it looks like this frontier math benchmark that was used by these mathematicians was commissioned directly by OpenAI. And
Okay.
then to read the article and see only uh, for Mini mentioned as opposed to Google's Gemini Flash mentioned in one sentence and not mentioned throughout the rest of the article is a little suspect to me.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm just curious if you noticed that, if you thought about that at all, and if you didn't, do you have an opinion on like whether or not that might be influential or just any of that, right? And again, I'm not trying to like put you on the spot and be like,
Sure.
oh, it's a gotcha for you. It's just more like, oh, I started noticing, maybe there might be something else behind this. So yeah, that's the spirit of the question.
Okay, sure. Well, look, I mean, first of all, we got to understand that we're reading a journalistic interpretation of the study, right? We can presume that there's going to be some white papers that come out of this, right? So to your point, the scientist in all of us should say, hey, I'm going to go back to the source before I fully make an opinion on this, right? And we should all be seeking out that white paper, right? So I can appreciate, where that thinking might be rooted. But as far as the other portions you mentioned, I I think I'm okay with it because there are other benchmarks out there that are being used to test AI, right? I mean, this happens to be a mathematical benchmark, but there's coding benchmarks that are being used, right? And ChatGPT or OpenAI products aren't always leading in those benchmarks, right? There's different leaders across those, and in my experience, I also use LLMs for different things. I like uh, ChatGPT 4.0 for coding. I think it's a strong coding engine, but I don't like it for writing. I tend to use Gemini for writing. I use Grok because Grok is faster, right? So there's other ways to measure it, right? There's other benchmarks out there. So I think it's hard for me to say or to think, well, is this benchmark being gamed? Well, you'd have to kind of game every benchmark, right? Because OpenAI presumably would want to be good across multiple disciplines, math and coding and research and image generation, whatever, right? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question directly, no, that didn't really jump out at me. Like I said, the scientist in me does want to, eventually read the white papers that are going to come out of this. I think that's healthy for all of us to do. But there's other benchmarks, right? There's other benchmarks. There's other uses for LLMs. This just happens to be one of them that I think is interesting. So I'm happy to be wrong on some of that or any of that. But no, I guess I wasn't fully bothered by that, or it wasn't something that jumped out at me.
Yeah, and that's fair. Again, just curious
Yeah.
and limited exposure to this, first exposure to it. So definitely plenty of digging to still do. It's just interesting to learn that OpenAI actually owns these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And they have access to the statements and the solutions. So,
but I don't think that
yeah.
was the case prior to the tests, because prior to the test they were fairly careful about that. But to your point, I can appreciate that you're applying a critical eye, and because we should all be doing that, right? I mean, that's just a healthy scientific mind. So I can appreciate you're applying a critical eye to this.
Fitz, I can appreciate that as well. Kirk, I see you have a hand up. And then, Dennis, I'm going to pose a couple questions kind of around doing business as usual and, maybe how we go from using penguin pictures and our distracted, outputs of AI to maybe drive more meaningful change. Also, I wanted to bring up and learn your thoughts about synthetic data, which I know has been sort of an interesting thing within the data science world recently. And I'm very curious about the nature of this inorganic synthetic data and what this might mean for either faster speeds of learning and training for these AIs, and if you actually think that that's a quality way of approaching that, and like what is the need for this synthetic data. So more to come. Just I guess those two questions to kind of be in the back of your mind. Kirk, did you want to share something here? Any notes that you want to add to the table before we open up that?
Yeah, real brief, and just to back up data science on this, you can take this, make a template out of the experimental validation that they did for this benchmark, and you can build a script on a local machine using your CPU and GPU and iterate into equations and functions which are not trained into a model. And then you can actually run these experiments on other models. So you basically have a layout here as a prompt to build your own experimental validation test. And I can tell you from my personal experiments using AI Tutor across a very large number of models at parameter counts over 10 billion, I see this function or this quality of mathematics synergy. But it requires having a very good understanding of prompt engineering in the core system prompt that you're running to achieve that. And anyway, I want to say that I encourage everybody to do their self-validation and proof out anything that they see, but you can build it yourself. I just want to encourage people to if they are skeptical.
Yeah.
Kirk says, "Go and test it yourselves. Go and
Yeah.
test it yourselves. You can do it." I love
Yeah,
it, Kirk.
and you know what?
Appreciate that
And
note.
to further back that up, that is something I talk to my audience about. That is the point of white papers, right? Publishing a white paper is supposed to encourage that peer review and that peer validation, right? So yeah, he's 100% right. It's out there. The methodology is out there at the very least, right? Even if you don't like the benchmark, you can still follow the methodology and do it yourself, and that's a very important part of the scientific process.
And I love the idea that we have Fitz on stage that is given a critical eye to stuff, because
Sure.
innovators have to do that. We can't be duped. We have to see what's going on and see
Yeah.
where the interests are and those lines of influence from studies to those who might be funding the studies. Fitz, all that matters.
Sure.
So well appreciated the critical eye there. You have a hand up. Anything that you want to add before I kind of rapid fire here on Dennis? And then also, before we go to you, Fitz, folks, now is a good time. We have about 15 minutes left, 10, 15 minutes left in this segment. If you're interested in taking the mic, not to do a 60-second pitch, but to quickly highlight your project, to simply tell us where you are in the process of building, who you're looking to connect with, what you might need from the community of innovators, come up and grab the mic. We'll be doing that before we move anywhere towards our AI demos today. Fitz, go ahead, grab that mic. What do you think?
Yeah, just to clarify, and I wish AI John were still here. I'm sure he could lend more expertise from the SEO side. Just like trying to count the number of times that O4 Mini is mentioned versus Google Gemini's 2.5 Flash is mentioned in the article. Like, there's a stark difference, right? And so the SEO value of this article to OpenAI is much greater, in my opinion, than to Google Gemini's 2.5 Flash, right? So I was just trying to kind of highlight something along those lines and be like, okay, well, what does that mean, right? That's really the only kind of like main thing that was jumping out to me in terms of like, oh, okay, what was the actual influence of this article? So yeah.
No, Fitz, I can absolutely appreciate that without a doubt. All right. And hey, thanks for bringing up some important notes there, Kirk, along the way on what we can do to kind of vet some of that ourselves. I love that. Dennis, so a lot of folks in the community, some great builders in here, by the way. We have folks with us who are in the room right now who are building AI businesses, who are figuring out how to leverage this technology to make even non-AI businesses come to life even quicker. So
Mm-hmm.
streamlining those ideas to impact in some incredible ways. But as a data scientist, as somebody who has 100,000 people subscribe to them on YouTube to hear his thoughts on AI and data science, there are likely some core elements, some content that you put out on a regular basis that you feel like can be a North Star or really help folks to stop doing business as usual and just creating penguin dancing pictures, but actually use this AI to advance what they're doing, right? And I think I'd love to hear any notions or additional thoughts outside of that context that you think could be valuable to a group of innovators that we have here listening now and folks who catch the recording of this space.
Sure. So there's a lot of ways that I could answer that because I have done a lot of teaching, and like I said, I do come from the practitioner side. But if I love the fact, Josh, you highlighted that this is a builder audience. So I'm gonna use this opportunity to push forward an idea that I haven't been able really to push a lot in my audience because it's more instructional sometimes. So for builders, I would tell people that I am definitely pro vibe coding. I think that I'm sorry, who's the other gentleman? Is it Kirk? Kirk mentioned, prompt skills, right? prompting is very important, and I think it's very key to being able to develop your own code, your own apps, things along those lines. So for builders, I would say that there is a massive opportunity that I don't see a lot of people focusing on. And that is that there are a lot of bloated code bases and the bloated companies that come with them for a lot of apps out there that could be fairly easily replicated with AI tools that are out there now. The case study that I've put out there in a brief format, I think you can find this in my previous X postings. Let's talk about Match Group, okay? Match.com. Big offices in Dallas, I believe, is their main headquarters. They manage a couple of apps. Do you know how many people Match Group employs? Would you be surprised if I told you that a dating app employs more than 4,000 people? And have you seen their interfaces? Their interfaces are terrible. I would love for somebody out there to host a hackathon. You could probably replicate all of Match.com in a couple of weekends and 4 pizzas. Like you could destroy Match.com in a weekend with vibe coding. Have you seen their stock price? I mean, it's just a bloated, poorly managed company. And they're not the only ones. So if I was a really aggressive builder out there, start going through some of those app lists, some of the apps that you use. And I'm not talking about the software as a service stuff. I think that has its own problems. But start looking at some of these consumer apps. I mean, go take a look at the Yahoo Finance page on Match.com. Can somebody tell me why Match has 4,000 employees? Like, Match.com right now could be like a one-person company, right? One-person company with a bunch of agents. Like, when you hear about that, when people say, oh, the next unicorns are going to be small, lean staffs, I think there's one right there ready for the picking. And they're not the only ones, right? So I would encourage builders out there to start thinking with that type of AI first attitude, because that's what I coach a lot of my business clients. I have a lot of business owners, and that's what I help them with, having an AI first attitude. How can AI help me with this? Well, AI could probably help you rebuild Match in a very short amount of time. It'd be a massive marketing effort after that, right? And they'd probably offer to buy you because they're really good at buying competitors, right? But there's plenty of examples out there, plenty of tools that are out there. I mean, I have a really good friend. He's a managing director he's been a managing director at a couple of large banks now. I don't want to mention them. But I told him, hey, let's start a private equity fund. Like, wouldn't it be great to start a private equity fund and you did nothing but go out and destroy the Match.coms of the world? Just build a portfolio of those companies. You could have a 10-person private equity fund and, vibe coders or whatever you want to call them, prompt engineers, that could build a portfolio of companies in a year, 2 years. You could literally start from zero and do that. Start it as a private equity effort and just start picking off these bloated, terrible code-based companies, right? Like I if I was a builder, I'd be excited about that opportunity. So I'll stop there, Josh. But that's my latest hot take for a room of builders like the great people in this room.
Dennis, I'll always take the hot take. If you ever have a stage, or if you ever have a itch to come and give a hot take to builders, that we'll take it. Where is the VC or private equity group who's funding? And I think there's so many alternatives to Match.com being made right now that the game between the VCs is deal flow quality to try to find the groups that are actually going to create the version that will replace it. And so I wonder if there's just such an incredible push in that direction from builders to do things like that already. If not, I mean, what a thesis for a VC. Morgan, I see you have a hand up. Any
Stop
questions, any
calling my
comments?
name. You're calling my name, Dennis. Oh man, like seriously, it's so funny that you say this because all weekend I've been analyzing, deep diving, all even Match. I pulled up Match, so I'm so happy that you said that because there's a hackathon on Bonk, and I'm involved in crypto a little. So there's a
Okay.
hackathon on Bonk, and I came up with Boink. It's a it's a Web3 dating app that also
Okay.
talks about like just their interest in crypto. So and I've been a little hesitant, and there's only like 5 days left to submit. So and I'm like, oh, but my funding's been down, and I'm like, but if I can find people who are even into it, like and you just spoke to me, so thank you. I appreciate
Well,
that.
but let me give you a little piece of
Yeah,
advice there. Though. Let me
please.
give you a little piece of it because my fear is that it would become that effort that I'm describing would become bloated in itself, right? And then, as one of my friends used to say, you're hustling in reverse, right?
Right.
So I would stick, and also, Josh, just so we're clear, right? I'm using Match as an example, but I think there are other companies out there. But I would focus on not necessarily being innovative. You don't have to be better than Match. You just have to be smaller than them, right? The biggest expense any company has is always people, period, right? Salaries and workman's comp insurance and all that stuff, right? So you don't have to be better than them. You just have to be slimmer than them. So if I was going to explore that, take away the crypto, take away whatever, $5 a month or some $50 for a lifetime subscription, and you tie it to helping people go out and form genuine in person relationships. You can also tie it to fertility rates, which is something that I'm an advocate for, right? Just tie it to, hey, you know what? I'm going to put the connection back into dating apps. I want people to go out and date. I'm going to remove the ridiculous matching algorithms. I'm going to remove the ridiculous fees, and I'm going to run it as a lean and mean company, right? Because you're still getting the beautiful recurring revenue model, right? You're not losing that. So keep it lean, keep it free of bloat, and I'm going to do crypto with it, and we got to have live streaming on it, and we got to just keep it lean, keep it focused on connections, keep it accessible at accessible price point, and just be smaller than Match. That's all you got to do. You win by being smaller than Match. The win is baked in already.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate it. It's just I just felt like in Web3 there was like a lack of just everybody's there's a lot of toxic people over there, so I wanted to bring some light and just relationships and being able to connect and meet people. And I've been involved in
Yeah,
events for over 20 years, in real life events, so I wanted to do IRL events with it as well. So yeah, and I don't need,
sure.
believe me, I don't need to be matched. So I was just more looking into them and Tinder and all the other ones just to, I haven't touched a dating app in a long time. So it's like just looking at them and seeing, like how they've changed, what they do, what their questions are, how their flow is. So greatly appreciate what you said, though. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Well, I mean, if you look at their interfaces, their UX and all that, they haven't changed much,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, so it's not a very high bar. And again, I'm only using them as an example. There's others out
Oh
there,
yeah.
right? Go on the App Store and just start picking off the lists,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Just start scrolling through and pick the
Mhm.
ones you want
Yeah,
to replace.
yeah.
I
That's a
love it.
target. That's a target. That's a target. Oh, look, I got 4 portfolio companies for my PE fund, right?
See, it's a very interesting thing, even for folks here who want to work on building a good exercise to go and find those
Sure.
legacy kind of apps, and we'll build a replacement with AI. I think that that's completely reasonable as a
Yeah.
task to do.
Yeah, and like I said, the win is baked in. Go look for those bloated code bases with the bloated engineering staff. If you can beat that, and you can with the tools, you've already won.
Dennis, I love it. I love it. Sharon, I
Thank
want to
you.
go your direction. I know you had a hand up. Any questions, comments, or thoughts that you might have for data science Dennis while we have them would be wonderful. Sharon, Mike is all yours. Good to see you.
I hope my mic is working because it wasn't working for the past 2 days, but it
You're
seems like we have.
perfect.
We got you.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just want to thank you guys for having these fantastic guests today. This has been really awesome. I wanted to ask Data Science. Is that your, wait a minute, is that your real name? Dennis, I am so sorry. I just read Data and you're talking Data, so I'm sorry about that. But Dennis, what are your thoughts on, Y Combinator, for example, they speak a lot about these vertical SaaS, right? That something that just solves one specific problem and that really good. Do you think that new builders should be focusing on that? I mean, I like the idea with the App Store because a lot of people have been saying that. And I think many that are making millions of dollars with their applications solved one specific small problem that they saw in other applications, and it's just better and easier. But I would love to get your thoughts on what you think about these micro SaaS solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm certainly willing to hear about specific items people have in mind, because I know that there are some very niche and very innovative items out there. But generally speaking, I think that there are some fundamental problems with some of those SaaS efforts. And when I say that, I'm really kind of referring to the kind of like the sales cycle and the way some of these SaaS are implemented. And I'm talking, based on my experience, at enterprise level companies, seeing how enterprise sales are made and the implementation. I've seen how that sausage is made, right? And the part that I'm stuck on is that most SaaS products aren't sold in a vacuum, right? You're usually buying it as another package. You're buying it as part of your enterprise license, or you're buying it for whatever reason, right? Sometimes it's given to you, right? I mean, if you buy enough copies of a Windows and Office combination, Microsoft will do anything for you, right? They'll send your staff to training if you want, right? So that's the part that I have trouble with when you see people who come up with these like microfinance SaaS services or things along those lines, or accounting services, or whatever the case may be. I think they're in for a harder uphill walk on the sales side than they realize, because nobody buys those as individual components. You're buying them as a package, as a license, as part of a massive sale, right? That the company engages in. So, like I said, I'm more than happy to realize that there are other unique examples that maybe don't fit that argument. I get that. But sometimes I do come across those ideas and it's like, well, that's going to be a really hard enterprise sale. So, I'm going to stop there, but that's kind of what makes me hesitant about a lot of those ideas that I see out there. I don't think they understand how those products end up, at the end user at some large company.
I love that. Oh, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
No, Sharon, go ahead. I was going to say if you had any additional thoughts or
I
notes
asked this really on purpose because I wanted to get a different take, because everybody's speaking in that direction. And I personally also see that as kind of, it could be complicated in the future. Because enterprise, my question is now, what do you mean by enterprise? Do you mean also small businesses that cannot, because there are a lot of small businesses out there that maybe a lot of people are not paying attention to. It could be like your barbershop or whatever. That might be very small, but like these middle, I don't really put them in the enterprise category. Are you speaking about these businesses too?
Well, we'd have to further define that, right? Because Microsoft sells to smaller shops too, right? They don't have just enterprise clients. They'll have different pricing structures for those people, but they sell to smaller businesses too, right? So we would have to further define that, like more quantitative about it. So somewhere between a barbershop and a 10,000 employee company or something, right? But Could there be more innovation space at the smaller companies? Maybe, but you'd have to be solving a very, very specific problem for them, right? And at that point, it's kind of arguable. Well, if you're able to solve that for them and it's so niche, then like, is AI really your savior there, or is it just something nobody's attempted before, right?
Well, I guess it depends. I'm sorry that I'm going on, but this is a super interesting
No, you're fine. You're fine.
talk. I mean, this is a very interesting question that many of us should ask ourselves, right? Because if I think about now, let's think about, because there are probably some people that might not be that confident to really go big, right? And I think many small builders like myself are a little bit hesitant, right? Can we really solve bigger solutions? Will we be able to maintain it, right? These are very, very important questions that I also ask myself. So thinking about going more niche and I also find that these Microsoft tools, they're crap. They don't work very well. And they usually don't, if I look at the Google Workspace stuff, it's awful. Gemini's awful in my emails. It doesn't make any sense. So, but I can imagine building something better. And if, let's say, especially these small businesses, right, you might not be making big money, but think about the trust and the value that they see in myself. When I think about the small computer guys, right? My brother would do that as a side hustle. He's an IT guy, and he had his, all the people knew he was an IT guy, so they wanted him to fix their stuff. So he would go into the little offices like travel agencies and all these little shops and would help them, right? And it's more like, I don't know, it's more service maybe, and would solve their problems. So he would have kind of this ongoing service. He would get so much money from that because the people would always call him back because they trusted him. And now think about, if you as a small builder know how to build agents and know how to build certain tools, and you help these small businesses and you maintain it for them, because I think that's also a very big thing. It might be a little bit work, but imagine you would get 2 workers and you would have a local business. You would get 2 employees or even 3 that ride out to all these local businesses and help them. I think that would be a lot of value for us small builders. I just want to put that out there. I also build applications, but until I'm really done with my full application, it's probably going to take a year or 2 because there's a lot of things that go into it, and I just want it to be good before I launch it. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? With this, I know I said a lot. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to decide if that's really a fair comparison. Because in the example of doing like, hardware repair like that, that's not the business Microsoft is in, right? I mean, no massive companies, aside from like a Geek Squad, is really in that business, right? So the market itself creates the opportunity for somebody like your brother to do that. Whereas when you're talking about, software essentially, right? Or some sort of service like that, it's kind of hard to find an untapped market in that way. Somewhere there's a solution out there, or at least they'll tell you it is. There's a solution out there, right? So that's the part that I think I'm having trouble with, where it's not an apples to apples comparison in that regard. You're not beating a lot of enterprises if you're just the local IT guy that they know to call, right?
That's true. You don't want to devalue yourself if you have, especially for all the people that have expertise in a certain field. If you see that there's a problem, definitely go for it. But for all the others that might be asking themselves, well, I don't have that, I don't know, I think there's still other opportunities to get into the field, start working, start serving people, understanding their problems, helping them with solutions. It might not be necessary in a year or 2 from now, when certain enterprise tools just get better and people can use their Google Workspace and it's just perfect and everything works. I mean, then that might not even be a thing anymore. But yeah, I'm just trying to think a little bit broader and try across the field who could use AI and what would they do with it, and how could I serve as someone that has been using the tools and building the tools for the past 2 years.
I think it's worth.
Yeah, and I love the enthusiasm. So I definitely don't want to, rain on anyone's parade here. So really, if I were just to sum up my thought on it, was just make sure you can sell it, right? Make sure that you have a path to a viable sales process? Because that's really kind of like my underarching view, right? That some of these SaaS companies don't really recognize what they're up against. So that's really all I'm saying.
Sure, and I love the point, and I think this is worthwhile discussion just to pin a couple points on before we even go over to Kirk and keep moving into ITT. Sharon, I think part of what you're pointing out really it points to elements of this diffusion of innovation curve that we've talked a lot about inside this ITT, which is it's true that people in that diffusion of innovation curve might share a similar problem, but the ability to move towards a solution and integrate that solution into their existing context is vastly different. And so
Right.
I think a lot of times we see in that middle part of the diffusion of innovation curve, that big chunk, that's where things get figured out at an enterprise level, in that sort of what's cool to adopt and integrate and what's safe to adopt and integrate at the corporate and enterprise level is sort of ironed out. And Sharon, part of what I think you're honing in on is meeting these business owners regardless of the size of the business. Really, I think smaller businesses makes this point even more palpable, but meeting them where they are in their context and helping them to push towards where they could be in terms of value creation and value capture. It's not obvious to me that small mom and pop shops are on the front lines of adopting enterprise level technology to solve their problems. But at the same rate, I think that those types of shops do live in that early part of the curve and the later part of the curve. I think that there's an opportunity, Sharon, in what you're saying, to essentially meet businesses where they are, help look at the context that's dependent for integrating or solving some of these problems. And sometimes it's overkill. Like sometimes small businesses don't need enterprise level solutions because they just don't need them. They don't need those types of things, and they don't integrate well into even the dynamics with their customers and so on. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that world, and it's not too. I think certainly if you nail something at that level and you're able to scale it to the corporate enterprise level. And now, Sharon, your point of how do we manage that? Like, how do I maintain something like that as a small team? Extreme technical capacity helps a lot for that. Um, yeah, I guess I just wanted to chart quickly this sort of landscape of the diffusion of innovation. And I think there's real opportunities to find people who want to create and capture value, whether that be a small business or enterprise, who are not looking for full blown enterprise solutions. I think that that's a very real sentence. Uh, Dennis, anything to add on to there before we go to Sharon?
No, I love that summary, and lots of opportunities out there, and yeah, maybe some of the segmentation that you're talking about there, Josh, really is the way to go.
Sharon, anything on your mind to add to that? We'll go to Kirk, and I just have one question for Dennis, kind of more on this synthetic data. I mean, I'm sure I can look it up, but would love to hear your take on this. Sharon, in the meanwhile, where we are and what we're talking about, anything to add on? Please, Mike is all yours.
Yeah, thanks for that. No, this is super interesting. And I think it's definitely worth, thinking about and talking about, because I personally believe that not everybody's going to make the $1 million app. It's just not going to happen. And I just want to point out that there might be other ways to get into this, something that others might not be paying attention to, that might be manageable for you as a one person for now. That's just where I'm going. I do believe that we should go big. We should try. If we have an idea, we should definitely go for it, because we see 17-year-olds that are making millions of dollars because they just came out with a freaking awesome idea and sat there for a whole week and built it and shipped. That's definitely, but I just want to say that not everybody's going to make that. And I do find that everybody's so focused on a certain area. And I just want to, just point that out. If it makes sense, that's something that just has to be, thought about, right? And then there might be other ways to go instead of going big enterprise and trying to kill these, bigger players in the field.
Sharon, I love the point. I think there's so much meat on the bone there. And there's even a whole discussion to be had there. Maybe when we kick off Ideas to Impact Season 9, and we're talking about money making microservices on Wednesday, this would be like a great discussion to have. That way we're orientating all of our builds and everything that we're doing in that over those weeks in the right direction, and maybe making sure we're looking at the right problem space and not stepping on the toes of problems that enterprise level software has realized and put into a tool offering for almost any vertical. But what can we do to focus, to niche down, and to add a lot of value, I think is a really good discussion for next Wednesday. So hey, thanks for bringing that up. Kirk, I'd love to give you the mic. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Dennis while we have them, and then we'll talk a bit about synthetic data and right off into the sunset here towards AI demos. And again, I'll mention that if any innovators in the room want to come up and give a highlight, to highlight where they are in their project, who they're looking to connect with, now's a great time to do that, to come up and grab the mic. We'll be sunsetting this expert segment here momentarily, and we'd love to hear from anybody before we kick off live AI demos with Tech in Schools. Dennis, let me give you that mic. Sir, mic is all yours.
I thought you were going to Kirk. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Kirk.
No, that's okay. I could real short.
Kirk, rather. Kirk, go ahead and grab that mic.
Super short. Sharon's points are awesome, and everything she said there is something to pay very, very close attention to. And what Dennis is also, that exchange, incredibly valuable. Just want to add, take a look at the things that remove middleware, operating systems, Microsoft, Apple, all these. NVIDIA's architecture, their microservices, they allow you to put something, look at what NVIDIA has done in their research and development and then repackage that into scalable packages that work both for small business and then can actually scale into enterprise. And it's just really, really interesting. And they've just put together a new research area on that. So just check into what NVIDIA is doing. And I think you'll be really happy with that, Sharon. So anyway, that's all I had.
Kirk, always good to have you on stage, and phenomenal additions that you've made over the last hour in the world of AI, my friend. So thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Dennis, let me go ahead and give you the mic, because I know we've had you on stage for about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit less. This has been phenomenal. I want to just, get a last, maybe a couple questions in, little quick rapid fire. And then I'd love for you to share with innovators any last thoughts that you have for them, any notes, and we can start heading towards a close. Recently, I saw information about synthetic data, and I think for a group full of builders, people who are interested in where the world's moving, this type of stuff matters. And I'm probably late to the party, but nonetheless, I thought that we in data science were after real data, real things, information about people, about how they buy, when they buy, why they don't buy, where they go, where they don't go, who they talk to, all of the real stuff. What is synthetic data, and what is the use of that? To me, as somebody who doesn't know anything about that world, the term itself is terrifying, and seems that we could start heading towards, you want to talk about maybe dystopian or out of touch AIs when, over the last couple of years, and I know we're getting better, but where does synthetic data play a role in how these things are going to develop? And can you tell us about synthetic data in general? I'm very curious.
Yeah, great question. I hate to sound like I'm starting off with some philosophical existential discussion, but what is data, right? It's so tempting to kind of think of it in a generic way, but data is unique to every single project that you're working on, right? And especially nowadays, I mean, when you say that, are you talking about sound? Are you talking about images? Are you talking about text? Or are we talking, traditional databases and spreadsheets and millions and millions and millions of records, right? So we would kind of have to define that a little bit more, because I really think that there's different implications of each one of those. If you're going to tell me that it's financial data and you can create it within certain parameters, right? You can make it so that your synthetic data follows some example data's same distribution and statistical parameters. Okay, yeah, you could talk me into using some synthetic data there. But on the opposite end of that,
before we go any further, that's to me right there where I have the problem, because the data set is a representation of things that happened in reality. And
Sure.
so if we're then comparing a synthetic data set to that data set, we're not getting actual representation of the frames from reality that were snapshotted. It's just a reference to what we typically see in reality, right? So it's not reality
Well,
itself. It's more like this is kind of like reality, right?
but let me give you the opposite end of what I just mentioned, right? So on the one hand, like I said, if you told me that it's financial data and you have very good structured database that has it, and you want to just amplify that by doing additional synthetic data that still matches the distributions and the standard deviations and all that, okay, fine, you could sell me on that. But on the opposite end of that, one of the most terrifying things I've done this year, I was at CES and I came across a company that does synthetic image data to train FSD, or full self-driving car models. They create synthetic road signs and speed limit signs and road imagery for training of self-driving car models. So that is a completely different application of synthetic data, and I find that one to be terrifying, right? So I think that there's different levels to it. In the first example, you can make a statistically defensible reason why the synthetic data would behave similarly in modeling as real data would. Again, if you're staying within certain parameters, right? But in the other scenario, it would be kind of the opposite of that, right? You're kind of just eyeballing it and say, yeah, that looks like a speed sign, I guess, right? Or some sort of road warning sign or whatever, right? So I think it really just depends on what type of synthetic data you're talking about. On the other hand, if you were to rewind 2 years ago, prior to LLMs, if you were working on an NLP project, getting synthetic data for NLP projects was notoriously difficult to get, extremely difficult to get, right? Natural language generation was just not there. So if you come from an NLP world, you haven't lived in a world where synthetic data was even viable. That's changed in the last couple of years, but there have been some data science domains or data science specialties that haven't even had the possibility of synthetic data. So I think it just really depends on what type of data you're talking about, the type of project you're working on. And in some cases, do you even need synthetic data? I think sometimes companies tend to overstate their need or their justification for why they're doing synthetic data. I'll give you guys a funny example of that. I'm not going to name the company, but massive big box retailer. I was consulting with them on a project they wanted to do, on a data science project. You guys can probably guess the company, but they're a very large, big box retailer, stores all over the world, certainly all over the US. And we were talking about one of their cold storage warehouses where they had like all their fruits and vegetables and things like that. And they were telling me about how they had these sensors on the at the ceiling level, kind of like they had like a drop ceiling with sensors that would tell them like the different temperatures and like levels of light and like of UV rays in different parts of the warehouse. And they were telling me about how they wanted to go through this process to the sensors weren't always accurate. So there would be gaps in the sensors data. And they wanted to go through a process to find the gaps and to statistically come up with estimations of what those gaps would be, right? Because that's another form of synthetic data, right? Can you infer your data from existing data points, right? And we got to talking, and it just kind of slipped my mind to ask this up front. But as we got to talking, I started asking them, well, one, how often are these sensors reading and how many sensors do you have? And they said, oh, we have about 5,000 sensors. Like each one of them is, I think each sensor is like 6 inches apart or something like that. And it was like laid out in the grid above, above this warehouse. And I thought, that's, and I told them this. My conclusion to them was that it was a silly project because you have 5,000 sensors 6 inches apart from one another. Do you really care that there's a 3-second gap in the sensors? Because that's what the gaps were. The gaps were like three. You would go 3 seconds without a reading or 5 seconds without a reading. So that was a perfect scenario where you have 5,000 sensors, each reading every single second, and you're worried about one sensor having a 3-second gap? It just doesn't make sense, right? But yet they were ready to embark on this entire, synthetic processing approach for something that didn't really need synthetic data. You're swimming in data and you're worried about a 3-second gap? Just doesn't make any sense, right? So I think that, you kind of have to take a holistic view to it, right? What kind of data are we talking about? What kind of scale are we talking about? Do we really need that scale? So on and so forth before you come to a conclusion on that. And most of the time you can find some sort of other alternative or some statistically defensible approach to it.
So Dennis, would your take be, Josh, don't be concerned about the synthetic data. We're using it responsibly and we're figuring out how to do the right things. You don't have any concerns about this fake data, so to say. And I'm using the term fake lightly, but
Right.
just in the sense that it wasn't produced by any actual thing in the world. It was just mimicked off of it and then checked for plausibility against what we do see in reality. That doesn't make it novel data, though, does it? It just makes it fake data points, right?
Right. And also, to be clear, though, I mean, I am describing processes that are an individual choice of how you implement them, right? So, coming back to Sharon's example of the 17-year-old that's making, money selling their AI app, have they sourced it in an approachable, responsible way? I don't know, right? Maybe I wouldn't want to vouch in that particular scenario, right? But what I am proposing is that there are ways to go about in doing it in a responsible manner.
No, I love that. Hopefully eases some of the tensions for folks who have been following the news and looking at the sort of, changes in software 1.0, 2.0, so on, and what they're doing to populate, these models that they're training. It's
Sure.
important for us to know. I think it's really important for us to understand and know that. Nonetheless, Dennis, I think we could probably put a pin in it right about there. It's 4:45 here if you're in Denver with us and our team. If you're somewhere else, I know it's getting much later across on the other side of the ocean. So we're going to go ahead and start to sunset our second expert speaker. And Dennis, this was phenomenal. I know that we hit a bunch of different notes, or you could say different kind of key points in general,
Sure.
and some of them weren't that well connected. But nonetheless, thank you for taking some time to come into this I.T.T. and talk about the article, field some questions from great innovators in the room. I'd love for folks in the room to go ahead and be sure they're clicking on your name and following you on those different platforms where you're offering incredible insights on a regular basis around data science. Dennis, thank you again for the time that you gave us. Any last notes, final thoughts, things that you want to share with this community? Any words of wisdom or encouragement for these builders would be absolutely welcome. So, Dennis, I'll
Sure.
give you that mic and thank you again for the time.
Yeah, Josh. And again, thank you too for putting this together and all you do for this great community. Thank you all for having me. And, as Josh mentioned, I love the discourse also, right? I think discourse is a really important part of the scientific process. So thank you all for that. We are living in fantastic times. I am so happy I get to live in the age of AI because I'm really passionate about this stuff. So happy to meet with any of you or talk with any of you. Please reach out to me. I am Data Science with Dennis or DS with Dennis across basically all social platforms. But thanks for having me, and let's just keep on pressing forward. We're living in great times.
We are living in great times, Dennis, and it was great to have you on this I.T.T. Again, folks, take your moment while he's on the stage. Make sure you hit that follow button. I think he just hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Big congratulations. So he's making video content on a regular basis to help you guys understand not only AI, but getting in the weeds on it, as we did here over the last little bit, where that data science lives. So, all right, folks, we're going to keep charging forward in the Innovators Think Tank. I'm going to do a quick recap. I know I made a note a few times that if there's innovators in the room who want to take this opportunity, who want to come on up, who want to